Recording in progress.
Okay, well, all right, everyone, let's get started. So good morning, first and foremost. Calling to order the February 17th special meeting of the Newton School Committee. Hello to everyone in the school committee chamber and to everyone joining us from home. Before us, vying to become the next superintendent and leader of the Newton Public Schools, we have two current superintendents, highly qualified, highly regarded in their profession, who have arisen out of a process that commenced nearly a year ago as our finalists for this position. We are lucky to have them demonstrate such strong interest in Newton as the next leg of their educational leadership journey. On Wednesday, Anna Nolin, superintendent of the Natick Public Schools, visited Newton, and yesterday, Thomas Anderson, superintendent of New Bedford Public Schools, did the same. We were fortunate to have them spend a full day in Newton visiting our staff and family, touring several of our schools, engaging with school teams and students, participating in faculty, staff, and community forums. All of that before marshaling their stores of energy and sitting down with us for that most important, most crucial part of their day, the school committee interview. We are grateful for the time they provided us, and I am particularly appreciative of the honesty and candor with which they responded to our questions during this process. Next, I would like to remind my fellow committee members about the training that we received last year when Glenn Kutcher, Executive Director of the Massachusetts Association of School Committees, came to Newton at my request and led us through a training session on the search process for a superintendent. One of the many excellent pieces of advice he provided was that we guide our deliberation today in a manner that is strongly cautioned about being mindful about the nature of comments that we give regarding our candidates. Each of the candidates who accepted our invitation to become a finalist has subjected themselves to the challenge of interviewing for a job in an entirely public process. A process that demands that each piece, save a few limited exceptions, is done publicly, including our deliberations here today. Everything that we say is a matter of public record. Praise for the candidates and criticism of them become available for anyone to access. Even a well-intended remark may be repeated, reported, or taken out of context whenever a prospective employer considers one of our candidates into the future. For those reasons, please use your best judgment and discretion in explaining your preferences and telling the public why you support a particular individual. Negative comments, which may represent your opinion, it's your right to present, can attach to a candidate as fact and thereby damage their reputation. Thus, negative comments must be avoided, and I know that my colleagues are both skillful enough and respectful enough to observe those parameters. So at this time, I call for a discussion related to the superintendency and appointment of the superintendent of the Newton Public Schools. Our discussion will be broken into two parts. Part one will be a discussion led by our search consultants using a straw poll technique, the Delphi technique, under the guidance of Aresta Johnson and Jeff Melendez from HYA. Part two will be a selection of the candidate. As a practical matter, the appointment of the superintendent will require an affirmative majority vote of all members present and voting. Hence, if all 9 members are voting, at least 5 are required. However, it is strongly recommended that we come to a unanimous decision as the best signal to our community that we are presenting a united, cohesive front of support for our new leader. Right now, let's invite Aresta and Jeff, our search consultants from HYA, to take us through their process, after which we will review a summary of the feedback that we received from members of our faculty and staff, from our community, and from the chairs and teachers association leaders of each finalist district. I will give you that summary. Emily will give you the piece from the community feedback and the staff feedback forums. These summaries and our discussions will be framed by the strengths and potential contributions to our district of the candidates. So. Yep. That's perfectly fine. Please join us.
Is it possible to ask a question? Does it make sense to hear the feedback before we do the straw poll?
That's a good question. I think, Aresta, I'm going to toss that one to you.
Good morning, everyone. So what we would like to do is just take the pulse of the room, and then we will get into the feedback as well as the discussion. So this is just a soft pulse, so everyone has a sense of where you stand on a preliminary basis, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I believe, Madam Chair, you have a copy of the Delphi technique, and if everyone received that?
No. Lisa, do we have the copies?
You have them, sorry, you asked me to give them to Tamika.
Oh, dear. Oh, I apologize. Yes, I do have them. Sorry about that. We'll pass them this way. Great.
So what the Delphi technique will do is give us a pulse, as I mentioned before, of where everyone is standing. And again, this is not a vote. It is not an official or unofficial vote. It's simply, for lack of a better term, a straw poll to get a pulse of where everyone stands. Candidate one in this case is Anna Nolin, and it's ranged that way because Miss Nolin came into the Newton for her day in Newton. So she is candidate one. Number two is Thomas Anderson, because Thomas followed up secondly with his visit in Newton yesterday. Having said that, what we'd like you to do in the top box, make your soft, based on all the information you have gathered thus far, just your soft recommendation of candidate one versus candidate two. And if you like, you could pass that sheet down. And Jeff, my colleague over there, will place those numbers into the matrix, and we will give you a pulse of where you stand as a school committee.
So Paul, since you're joining us remotely, I'm going to ask that you email Aresta your initial straw vote. Oh, email Jeff. I'm sorry.
Can I ask a point of clarification here?
Yes.
So in my understanding of the Delphi technique, the polls are usually taken anonymously, correct?
Well, you each have been assigned a number at the bottom. So in this case, it's not an anonymous poll that we're taking. So you will have, once we're done, we can share publicly what each person provided, but also we really want to just rate the candidates. So typically what we've done in this process is share where everyone has been standing. That's what we've done throughout the process.
And Chris, for your knowledge, balloting, it's essentially a ballot, right? An informal one at this point. That is required that we publicly state position. So an anonymous ballot would not be permitted in this process for a finalist interview, or I'm sorry, for the finalist deliberation. So let's go forward.
I'm not going to belabor the point.
And how do you
let's go
literally fill this out? Sorry to be so,
Your check?
and are we circling who we are?
Yes, just
Okay.
circle in the top box that you have, the top table, you have one, and then you have a blank row, the number two, and a blank row. Circle your choice, candidate one or candidate two. And as mentioned, candidate one would be Dr. Anna Nolin, and candidate two is Mr. Thomas Anderson. And you can hand those over and we'll plug those into our matrix.
By our. Is that how we're supposed to do it? Because by our ward.
One more clarification question, Aresta. So,
But that's by our ward, isn't it?
Yes, by your number.
Yeah, I mean, I put it under my ward.
yeah, okay. So we circle on the top of this sheet, 1 or 2 as our preferred candidate. And then underneath, do we need to circle, I'm the number 4, 5, 6,
Why aren't we just
Do
putting
we
a
need
check
to
under our
indicate-
ward?
or totally anonymous, and I don't need to circle anything?
So there are a couple of things that you could do, okay? Just for clarification, you
Please.
each have been assigned a number, so you could circle your name there,
Okay.
or you could just simply write in your box. And your box, so for example, you have your number 5, so you are literally column number 5, okay? If you make a note there, then I know that is.
Because our number is our
Want
ward.
to know,
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we do want to know.
yeah.
The number is not.
Number is not our ward.
No.
Oh, mine is. I mean, I don't
Alright.
know why we assigned.
So
numbers.
let's hurry up and get that in. It's very straightforward. Remember, think of this as a very informal ballot.
I'll also
um,
initial it and sign it. There.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right, so while Jeff is tabulating those results, we will take a very short pause. Just to allow that to happen. It's a quick process. And yes, I realize the Delphi technique is best used when there are multiple, more than 2, let's put it this way, folks that you are rating or comparing against. But we're using it this way as the start of a conversation, a snapshot of where folks are feeling, and it will frame our conversation, because then we will refine it afterward by discussing the positives, feedback, and strength that you feel that a particular candidate would bring to our district. Also, Jeff, can I ask if you've received Paul's result? Okay, good. Are we all set?
Yes, and Paul's on this as well. Yes. And one thing I do want to share with you, going back to the pulse of the room, it also lets us know how closely aligned you already are, or how far apart you are. And in this case, you are all very closely aligned as a school committee. So everyone is aligned the exact same. And so if you want to go into your feedback and discussion.
So I think at this point, Cove, to your point, this was the place where I was hoping, after we had that kind of snapshot of where we are in terms of the candidate that we are strongly favoring, that we would then discuss the feedback that we received from the community. So Emily, if you could give us a summary of the feedback, that would be great.
I'm sorry, I'm confused.
confused
I
as well.
thought we just took a straw vote. We don't see the results of the vote.
I can share with you what they were. You all were aligned with the exact same candidate.
It was unanimous.
Yes.
We all, thank
Mhm.
you.
So that was the part that I heard, and I know who I voted
Yes,
for on
it
my
was
ballot.
Unanimous.
Mhm. But go ahead, Chris.
Can I just make one point that
Yes.
that I think the group needs to think about? While if there was, you know, a unanimous preference that exists right now, that speaks absolutely nothing about the magnitude of difference that any individual saw between those candidates. One person might have said this was a 90-10 decision, and one person might have said it was a 51-49 decision. And this straw poll gives no indication of that.
Correct. So that's why we're going to now have a discussion.
Correct.
I
And
think
the
that point just needed to be made.
Absolutely. And I think I appreciate the point. Let's have a conversation about the feedback that we received from the community, and then we will talk about our individual observations as well. Go ahead, Emily.
So I'm going to split this out into 2 categories, again, because of the same as Jeff and Aresta did in terms of the order in which they visited the district. So I'm going to start with Dr. Nolin. So I have comments from the community and from the staff. There were about 50 comments in total, 30 community and 20 staff. And I'm breaking it down into who made the comments, at least for the positives, and then in terms of things that people wanted to hear more about is the second section. So first section, positives, that this is what snippets of what the community had to say. She has a down-to-earth, roll her sleeves approach to problem solving, good emphasis on data, transparency, and strong relationships with the community, focused on outcomes, implementation plans for every student, invested in professional development, collaborative model for negotiations and management style. will establish, a clear structured system of leadership, supervision, and support, good self-awareness of past mistakes, rebuild trust in Natick with community, parents, and staff, and finally, focus on students, calm but engaging. So that was the community comments. Staff said, direct, confident, and clear, has qualities of a great leader, sees herself as the lead teacher in Natick, approachable and thoughtful, smart, creative, and an amazing communicator. Strong interpersonal and communication skills will bring the community together, and impressed with her tenacity, honesty, humility, intelligence, and respectful nature. In terms of things that people wanted to hear more about, they want to hear more about transitioning from a smaller district to a larger, more complex district. Wanted to know more about increasing staff diversity, supporting special education and ELL students, as well as supporting DEI. So that's Dr. Nolin. And then going on to Mr. Anderson, there were 39 comments, roughly 20 community and 19 staff. In terms of community positives, values are spot on, natural style is inclusive, very impressed, understood the complexities of a large school system. He impressed me. Very impressive experience turning around struggling schools, like his interest in building and cultivating relationships and improving communication with the parent community, wants to instill a love of lifelong learning. And then in terms of staff, these are some of their comments. Open-minded, curious, and creative, personable, warm, and approachable, cares about all students, brings a new and fresh perspective, and align with the ideals and values of the district. In terms of things that both community and staff members were interested hearing more about, it's about the strategic plan for the district, academic excellence in elementary and middle school, what his blueprint for education is, applying his current educational experiences specifically to Newton, and supporting the needs of ELL students.
Thank you, Emily. So I had already shared that I was going to reach out to the union leadership of both districts and the chairs of the school committee of both finalist districts. For Anna Nolin, I spoke with the chair of the Natick School Committee, Kathy Collins, and with Jefferson Wood, the president of the Natick Teachers Association. Kathy described Dr. Nolin as a highly skilled collaborator who employs creative approaches to accomplish goals and initiatives and finds ways to collaborate with the community as a whole. She describes her as very, very smart. Dr. Nolin is also described as hardworking and a model of dedication. Jefferson Wood of the Natick Teachers Association relayed that Dr. Nolin goes a long way towards building productive relationships and is able to maintain a level of empathy and understanding for teachers while being an effective and inspiring leader. Both described having a positive working relationship with Dr. Nolin. For Thomas Anderson, I spoke with the chair of the New Bedford School Committee, Mayor John Mitchell, and Thomas Nickerson, the president of the New Bedford Teachers Association. Mayor Mitchell spoke of Mr. Anderson's strengths as having a wealth of experience and an ability to command respect. He described his working relationship as very strong, very collaborative, and that Mr. Anderson has a strong moral compass where his integrity is beyond reproach and informs his professional outlook, his relationship with others in the city and throughout the region. Thomas Nickerson of the New Bedford Teachers Association described an amicable working relationship and that Mr. Anderson is skilled at effectively matching the skill sets of his team to the required tasks without micromanagement, and that he shows a deep respect for his team. So those were the summaries that we received, the feedback. Each of us received email feedback that folks have been sending since our finalists were publicly announced. And so as recommended by MASC, each school committee member will now have an opportunity to articulate why they feel a strong positive impression for a particular candidate. So here we're going to start alphabetically by first name. Cove, I heard you last night that you are, I heard you I heard you last night that you, I did give him a little warning, but I heard you last night
Yeah.
as Ward 8. You are generally in the latter side of things, and so many comments have been captured. This allows you on your birthday, happy birthday,
Happy birthday.
happy birthday to
Happy
be
30th.
third on our stick. On Ping, go ahead. Strong positive impression for your particular candidates.
Yeah, I thought, thank you. I thought without a straw vote, we can talk and then we can share our, thinking and thoughts, but that's fine. I would like to thank Arista and Jeff for bringing those excellent candidates to our school committee and to our community. And I was impressed both, after Anna's interview, I thought she was really impressive. And last night, when Anderson came, and I was impressive too. So, and I was deeply impressed by their personal stories. And I assume you guys probably too. For Anna's story, I should have called Dr. Nolin. She grew up in a family, sibling 9, and the parents did not support her education, and her teachers supported her. And I think that probably helped her to have this strong passion to support the staff, because you see, her teacher helped her to change her life, and that was very impressive. And for Mr. Anderson, impressive too. Her father grew up as a sharecropper in the rural, South Carolina, and that was impressive too. Education helped him to be an education leader. So those stories stay in my mind, and I thought deeply last night and this morning to see what their qualities. And I think that both are wonderful leaders, and they have potential to go even far away. And of course, their background a little bit different. And that's very interesting for me to even think about their different perspective, different experience, different accomplishment. One as a urban school leader, and truly not only in district, but statewide, nationwide, that experience, tremendous experience. And for Dr. Nolin, of course, strong teaching, learning leader, which I really appreciate as an educator myself. So again, I'm very happy. Both of them are tremendous, impressive candidates. So I even this morning rated both of them according to our criteria, and they almost got identical, ratings. I give highest 5 for each person, and if little below 4 or 4.5, I added it together, almost identical. Then when we think what our Newton district is looking for, then that will be interesting. And that's why I came to my conclusion when looking at their skills, talent, accomplishment, and their perspective, philosophy, to see if they match what we are looking for. And they make a little bit difference. So let me start here, and then I'd like to hear our colleagues' perspective. Thanks.
Thank you, Peng. Appreciate you going first. Up next, we have Chris.
So before I begin, I would just like to ask a point of clarification on the process. Are we intending, this is an opportunity to say your piece, or we see how that, or, sort of the deliberation, grows organically, or are we thinking about this as structured discussions around process, preference, et cetera?
I mean, I think you can choose your own adventure. This is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to tell us what you're thinking. We already have a snapshot of how we as a group, the candidate that we as a group are gravitating towards, but this is your opportunity to tell us why.
Okay, that's fair enough. So I might take a minute then to
Sure.
go through a couple of things.
Absolutely.
Just to make sure I kind of cover everything that I'm thinking about. So I think first from a process perspective, this has been a unique process for me in terms of, you know, the amount of time we as individuals have spent with these candidates, who's going to be the new CEO of our $250 million enterprise. And, you know, I think I walk away from it still with lots of questions for each of the candidates. And I've bugged Cove about this many times as our, you know, in-house practicing educator. She has kind of assured me that this is sort of how we do it in the education world. So, you know, with setting that aside, I think, you know, one thing that I hope, you know, I've really tried to be cognizant about, and I hope other committee members are as well. We saw two candidates with very different presentation styles. And, you know, if I think about Dr. Nolin, there was a very sort of crisp presentation. And when I think about Mr. Anderson, it was a very genuine sort of presentation. And, you know, there is an element of that in our decision making of, you know, how they approach communication. But I think we as well need to make sure that we're getting to the substance of what they were saying as well, and not letting you know, presentation govern how we think about the candidate. So it was just something I was cognizant of as I was thinking about this, and I hope others are. So I tried to, you know, have our desired characteristics kind of guide how I was thinking about this. And I guess I'll speak about each candidate in turn. You know, the things that struck me with Dr. Nolin were whatever the issue that seemed to come up, and I attended both faculty sessions, I attended both community forums, and of course we had our interviews. There seemed to always be a program in place that she has experienced, that she has implemented, that is there in Natick. You know, she's done the work on some of the things we're contemplating in terms of a profile of a graduate, or, you know, what she referred to as a State of the Union, which we're calling our annual report. She's done those things. She's put those in place. She really seemed to have a great sense of using different modes of communication. You know, she talked about you know, working with high school students and developing podcasts to communicate with her community during the pandemic. And, you know, I think that sense of communication is going to be vitally important in whoever takes this role going forward. She was always able to, you know, this kind of goes along the lines with the first thing, she was always able to sort of, you know, draw a straight line from the issue to the program or experience. And, you know, she talked about the stay interviews. She talked about having a family engagement center, you know, some of the special education programs. They were all, it was just always so clear to say, how do we take this issue and how do we move it to something actionable? Her core values, and she was very clear about this, how her core values align with Newton, and I would agree with that. I think she had the right concept of thinking about us as a governance team and what our role is relative to a superintendent. You know, I think she used the phrase governance team, and I will take this to my governance team. I heard that maybe a dozen times throughout the course of the three presentations I listened to. And I think most important, as you know, I listened to everything she said, and even when she was talking about an issue where maybe I wasn't exactly sure where she was going, or maybe I felt like, well, I'm not sure if I entirely agree with that, she never wavered from having a focus on outcomes. And, you know, I know you've all heard me say this, but, you know, I think we as a district need to be more outcome driven. And I think when we get into all these thorny subjects about which the community might disagree, if you're clear about what the outcomes are, that can take all the disagreement out of the way, because we're showing how we are focused on improving outcomes for students, and that will help make things clear. So I think that ability to always have that focus on student outcomes is perhaps what struck me most. In terms of Mr. Anderson, you know, I kind of mentioned his sort of very genuine presentation style and method of communication. And as I think about, you know, what this challenges this district the most, and I know you've heard me say this as well, it's this restoring the sense of trust in this institution. And I feel he would have a real ability to do that. His sense of wanting to listen to diverse viewpoints. You know, he used the phrase time and space over and over and over again through his 3 presentations that I listened to. And, you know, he talked about diversity as a competitive advantage. And, you know, he talked about focusing on the positives. You know, he made the very explicit point of, you know, talking about things in a negative light. And I think, you know, he used the phrase of something along the lines of, you know, if you make people feel bad about this discussion, they're going to disengage from it. So I feel like he had this very productive sense about how to approach some of these thorny issues that we're dealing with as a district. And, you know, I almost sort of envision, you know, approaching these things with some of our families and some of our community members, and really wanting to hear what those diverse viewpoints were and having respect for them, you know, to use his phrase, to give them the time and space needed. I was very impressed by his focus on access and opportunity as a concept of equity, and his, you know, he used the phrase never lowering the bar on multiple occasions. And, you know, I think, again, having that concept of how to move forward with that issue is something that would resonate amongst a lot of our community members and maybe help bridge that divide. And the final point I guess I want to make is, you know, in thinking about where we are as public school systems, what our kids are going through, you know, the struggles that we have on the back of the pandemic, and what our role was in creating some of those problems. He really had the humility to recognize that these issues existed before the pandemic. And I'll use his phrasing of, you know, we weren't paying enough attention. And that is something I have not heard from a lot of folks in you know, the broader education ecosystem, of that sense of humility of, you know, we've got to be self-reflective about how we are where we are. And that was something that was, you know, rather striking to me, as his ability to be self-reflective and to, you know, to think about how you move forward from here. So I guess I'll leave it there as my thoughts on the 2 candidates.
Sorry. Appreciate that, Chris. 9 times out of 10, you and I are very much aligned in our thinking, and this is one of those times. So, Cove.
Yes, that was, you know, Chris summarized many of my thoughts. I mean, in thinking about this, the role of the superintendent is such a large and complex job. And this is, as much as this is a normal process in education, to have this public interview and to have limited contact, for lack of a better word, with the candidates, it is still, it's, to many people outside of education and even to myself, it's a very disconcerting process, because you really don't, there's not the chance to go back and have more conversations and to ask more questions and that kind of thing. So, so it's weighed heavily on me how to balance things between the candidates from their experience and what they've shared on paper with our experience of interviewing them, trying to weigh different communication styles to make sure that you're really getting the measure of the candidate, as well as feedback from the community, which is important. This is someone who leads the community, so it's important to hear from our community and from our staff and from our students. I don't know if we heard from any students, but they at least got to share they got to at least meet with the candidates. And thinking for me about all of the elements of this job is in some ways daunting. It's something that certainly I've taken very seriously and thought very much about. I feel lucky, from the moment I saw the finalists, I felt glad that we had people who were qualified and had, extensive experience as superintendents and interesting backgrounds. And so I felt from the beginning, before even interviewing, that we would be in a good place with either candidate. So that I felt really good about. Dr. Nolin came in. She was very, very warm. I think she was very professional in her communication. She talked a lot about communication. She certainly has been able to gain the trust. I remember actually in the beginning of the pandemic hearing from people in Natick and hearing that she was a person who was communicating really well with her community. Certainly she has built inroads. I personally really like some of the technology and ways that she's reached out to her community as well, because I do, possibly as a working parent who also does a school committee, are very appreciative of ways to engage that are not always in person in a certain time frame. And even her ways of engaging that didn't work in our presentation, but, having people do those polls, those instant polls and that kind of thing, I think is really engaging and showed a lack of fear of getting feedback from the community. It seems like she's taken a very personal approach in Natick, connecting individually with parents and students, and that seems to have created a lot of trust. I thought even her ability in one day to be able to get a sense of the community in Newton and to be able to reference in her interview that night examples from the students, for example, to be able to say, hey, this is what your students were telling me they're concerned about. And I thought her ability to kind of very quickly process those experiences and share them was very powerful. I thought that Mr. Anderson also was a very, very strong candidate. I really appreciate the diversity of his experiences as someone who has worked in urban districts. I think the complexity and the challenges in those districts really do prepare people for anything. And I think that he, demonstrated that he wasn't afraid to engage in conversations and to put together coalitions to talk about difficult things and to come up with solutions that were more complex than just, here's the answer I want to have. And I think, he's shown that he can manage a very large and diverse district with a lot of challenges. So I was very impressed with him as well. At the end of the day, I thought a lot about it last night. I think that Dr. Nolin is our candidate. I think she meshed with our community and connected in a way that hopefully will set her up for a lot of success in Newton. So that's where I stand on it.
Thank you, Cove. Go ahead, Emily.
I also echo a lot of what my colleagues have already stated in terms of how fortunate we were to have two excellent and well-qualified candidates. It's been a long road. That's for sure. So I'm thrilled that we're at this place and we have these two choices before us. Also, as Co said, a number of my points have already been stated, but I just want to quickly go through my perspective and feedback, particularly in light of the desired characteristics document. So I'll start with Mr. Anderson. So one of the things that struck me quite strongly in both our interview as well as in the community forum is how student-centered he is. He's extremely student-centered. It's very clear to me that he cares very deeply about the student voice and values the student voice and wants to hear from the students in terms of what's going on and how they're feeling and where they think there can be improvements. I also feel that he's a coalition builder. He's demonstrated that in his interviews. He seeks out multiple stakeholders. When there was tough community decisions to be made, he made sure that there were multiple stakeholders on a smaller committee to work directly with him to come up with solutions and to do outreach to the community. So I appreciated that. He also deeply understands the intersection of academic excellence and equity and the importance of access. That to me was a really strong aspect to his interview process. And also he's introspective. I also want to mention the COVID example. I find it really interesting how upfront he was about the fact that, yes, I mean, the pandemic itself, led to a lot of issues, but it also significantly exacerbated the ones that we were handling beforehand. And so I thought that there was a level of introspection with that I really, really appreciated. I'm not going to be that long. I'm kind of short, but in terms of Anna Nolin, also very student-centered, but in a slightly different way. I was very attracted to the concept of this personalized plans for all students. She's leader, definitely a listener, and humble enough to change course, very upfront and open and honest about past mistakes in decision-making, which I thought was really refreshing. Definitely data-driven. I find that to be exceptionally important as well, not just in terms of being able to track performance. I find it actually interesting that parents get a view into their children's performance metrics, which is something that's was appealing, but also that data is a critical part of decision-making for her. And I really appreciate that. Also coalition builder, builds trust, engages community, again, looks for multiple ways to garner feedback and thereby transparency and trust with the community. So I really appreciated that. Measurable success of outcomes, it's all the data piece, but also appreciated the use of the profile of a graduate and the profile of an educator as sort of the foundational document to think about the direction that the district is going and the implementation of specific programs. I also felt like she was respectful of our culture and that she's a listener and she won't necessarily come in and impose her major cultural changes the second she walks in the door. I also felt like she had a number of out-of-the-box answers in terms of the complexity of budgets. So I thought that was very interesting. And finally, I really appreciated her SEL and mental health supports that she's got going in Natick that could hopefully translate into Newton, particularly the concept of relationship mapping, just to identify isolated kids. So that's it.
Thank you, Emily. Up next, we have Paul. Go ahead, Paul.
Do you, or I thought Kathy goes before me?
Oh, I'm sorry. You are very good at your alphabetical name. It is true, Kathy. You are up, and then Paul. Sorry about that, Kathy.
No
Thanks.
problem.
Good catch, Paul.
So a number of the things that have been on my mind have been expressed. I'm nonetheless going to say some of them again. I think where I'll start is when I think about professional hiring decisions. In my day job, we have had a lot of conversations about how you balance the information you learn from an interview and how someone presents in an interview with everything else you know about a candidate, about their written submissions, about their substantive experiences, about the kinds of life experiences they've had that they bring to the table that inform their ability to do the job. And so I think it sort of ties back, Chris, to what you were saying about presentation style, in that while an interview is incredibly important as a tool in making a hiring decision, it's not always the only tool, and that you have to take into account a lot of other things about the candidate and the value that they provide in filling what the day-to-day job is that you expect them to do. In this particular instance, how one communicates is an incredibly important part of what we're looking for in our superintendent. And I think the ability to communicate clearly and compassionately and engagingly, both with our faculty and our staff and our parent community, is critical. I think a number of you have talked about trust and rebuilding a sense that we're all pulling in the same direction. And I feel that both of our candidates would do that well, because of the way they communicate, because of the warmth and the genuineness they bring to their communication style. I was very, very pleased with both candidates. I also was very pleased to see the life experiences they bring to this position. In particular, Dr. Anderson has managed large and complex districts that face, in some ways, more significant challenges than we do in terms of sort of baseline student performance. He's got an excellent track record of increasing, of adopting methods and programs and strategies to increase student performance. Dr. Nolin, too, has talked very eloquently about some of the programs she's put in place in Natick and the educational perspective and lens she brings as how she describes it, being the head teacher. So I have no concerns that either one of them would be excellent leaders for our district. I particularly like the attention that both of them paid to measuring outcomes, to using data and information to guide decision-making when you need to choose between programs that could go in different strategic directions. I was particularly impressed with Dr. Nolan's presentation of her 90-day entry plan. I felt like she provided with us with a very cogent explanation of what it would be like if she was here for the first 90 days. I think we know exactly what we could expect of her in the first couple of months, and then how she would be making decisions about how to focus on more strategic developments beyond those first 90 days. I think that both candidates were very strong in terms of their demonstrated experience in reaching out to the community to build collaboration, to involve different stakeholders. And I think that both of them would do an excellent job in trying to rebuild some of the trust that we've lost with parents in our district. Maybe I'll stop there.
Thanks, Kathy. All right, now Paul. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Tamika. I've really been enjoying people's comments. They're just so thoughtful, and I don't want to repeat things that folks have said. We had two excellent candidates who presented well, and I think we've all learned a lot from the experience. My key point of evaluation in this search is which candidate is most likely to be successful in helping the Newton Public Schools become more of a learning organization. You know, we always talk about the schools being teaching organizations, but a key aspect of any organization, especially an educational one, is how well does it learn? How well does it transform itself? And although I think both of them are very strong on that front, to paraphrase a famous movie, she had me when she said, "You haven't asked me about my relationship with the principals." When we said, what else should we ask you about? And because that was important to me, because the principals are the ones who, with the support and guidance of the superintendent, in turn provide the support and guidance and mentoring of the faculty in the schools, having their back when things get rough, but also gently applying a standard of expected performance and creating an environment in which teachers can learn from one another and beyond, to comfortably and productively carry out their craft, the craft that they're devoted to, that they became teachers for in the first place. You know, you don't become a teacher because you're a misanthrope. You become a teacher because you actually care about the future of humanity as seen in these children we have the care of. And I thought her presentation on those aspects of creating a learning environment for the teaching staff was particularly strong. But it went beyond that. It also said, how do we create a learning environment, a learning organization between the school system and the community? How do you tap the great wealth of experience and concern and engagement and desire on the part of the families in the community, and the businesses in the community, and the like. And she had really good thoughts about that. And my sense has been, watching the Natick system for a number of years, that she's done it very well there, and that the comments we all received from members of the elected members of the community in Natick, whether the school committee or the select board, were indicative of that kind of engagement too. So while I agree with everybody that we had two excellent candidates and who presented well and thoughtfully, I thought she deserved the edge because of that. Thank you, Tamika.
Thanks, Paul. Up next, we have Rajiv.
Thank you. I think much of what I was going to say has been said very eloquently by everyone else. It's good to go in alphabetical order in this sense.
We'll start doing this from time to time.
It sounds fair. I'm going to be very brief on this. I thought we had two excellent finalists, and as we were going through the interviews and the presentation, I found myself writing down things they were saying, with the mindset of, that's really interesting. I wonder if we could do this in Newton in terms of programs in Natick, approaches and educational advances that had been brought up by Mr. Anderson. I thought that in terms of the critical areas that I was looking at, both candidates more than checked the box. So did I think they could both build trust or rebuild trust and relationships? Yes, absolutely. Very different communication styles. Both would work in Newton. Love the focus on academic excellence. Neither was talking about lowering the bar. It was about how do we do more? How do we offer more? And I liked also that it was that academic excellence was a focus across the board, not just for the highest achievers, but really both made references to trying to lift all boats, as we might say it. Also very much liked both their approaches, very practical approaches to diversity and equity. They weren't just talking the talk, they had walked the walk. They had specific thoughts about how to practically support all students, without leaving groups behind, whether they were majority groups or minority groups. How are we going to tackle this? How are we already tackling this in our districts? So I found that impressive. And then data-driven. They were both very data-driven. It was nice to see. There were certainly aspects of what they talked about where I was scribbling down, we should try this. This could be interesting. Specific to each of the candidates, Mr. Anderson, deeply genuine, passion for excellence, highly inclusive, great track record with, as Kathy said, helping school districts that are in a challenging position to do well. So that was great to see. Dr. Nolin, very thoughtful, clearly a deep expertise in education. I know she also teaches certain courses, and I've spoken with former students of hers. Very strong communicator. So I did think they brought, in some ways, slightly different strengths and approaches, both of which would work well here, and I think help us get to a better place over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So I'll stop there. I think we'll probably do another round talking about who we're in favor of, but it was a great experience to meet with both of them and speak with them.
Thank you, Rajiv. Up next, we have Mayor Fuller.
Starting off, just to say thank you to Tamika and Emily for the many hours you put into this, to the search committee. Also, those, I think it was 17 of you. Was it 17? Thank you to the help from HYA, to the many people who wrote to us. You did bring us two terrific candidates, fine human beings, excellent educators, deep experience. I'm going to talk about Dr. Nolin. Everything that you've said about Thomas Anderson, this group has said. I lift up, I repeat. I both liked him and respected him, as did, I think, all of us. I'm going to focus on Dr. Nolin, as I believe that's was, at least in the straw vote, where we were all unanimously headed. It's such a difficult time in America for education, and here in Newton, we're all, those of us on the school committee and in the Ed Center, and our educators and staff are knowing what a challenging time it is. I found her core values and the breadth and depth of her experiences directly relevant to what we are facing, and the core values resonate with our needs today. I'll just pick out some of the words she used, which particularly resonated with me. Lifting students up to be who they want to be, the mix of standard support and respect, the idea of psychological safety, whether it's for our central administrators, our educators, our students, our parents, the emphasis on leading, listening, learning, and the intersection and the waves between them. We need, as Cove mentioned, it's such a complex job where you have to be the educational leader, the managerial leader, and a community leader. What she talks about with direct experience and a sound theory of the case and programs, practices, policies, and strategies for thinking through achieving both academic excellence and educational equity, personalized learning, that as Chris mentioned, some words you've heard over and over and over again. Personalized learning kept coming up in what she said, what she wrote. The emphasis on high standards across the board, outcomes and data and metrics kept resurfacing in a very positive way. I very much liked how she thought about everything about the teacher experience, from hiring to developing to supporting. She used the word championing in such a positive, nice way. And she not only has walked the walk or talked the talk or walked the walk, sorry, I'm confusing the term, with how she thinks about union leadership and negotiations. The difficulties of doing budgets in this hyperinflation time period, she talked through in such a thoughtful and serious way. I'll just mention one thing that I think not only will she lead and listen and learn, I'll throw in one more L word. I think she'll last. I think there's a commitment to being here and staying here. And that type of stability, I think, is very helpful. She's got this 90-day plan. It's great. It takes a few years to it'll take a few years to settle into Newton. We're complicated. There are a lot of us who care a lot. There's a lot of people to meet. There's 15 elementary schools alone, so we need somebody, I think. And I think I'm thrilled both of them raised their hand. I think Dr. Nolin is exactly what we need at this moment in time.
Thank you, Mayor Fuller. So, this is an interesting position, going towards the end of the long line of folks. You've all been incredibly eloquent. I agree with everything everyone said. Chris, you had particularly really detailed and crisp feedback for both candidates that resonated with me. Paul, the principal line was a key moment for me too, because it was an opportunity for us to reflect on the fact that we didn't raise that, but she felt that it was so important. It should be a very much a part of our conversations. The relationship that principals bear in being the conduit between the students and the community and the administrators and us. And so I thought that was really, really well done. I'm going to go through a few points and talk about a few things that resonated with me that each candidate brings to the table, or each candidate offers. I think, sorry, let me dive through my notes. Dr. Nolin described valuing a team of rivals and welcoming diverse perspectives, and at that, underrepresented voices, and keeping them centered in the conversation, which I thought was not only just responsive to the way that our school communities function, that we hear from some, but we don't hear from everybody. And we need to make that concerted effort to hear from everybody, the ones who aren't emailing, who aren't calling, who aren't availing themselves to us because they can, or they know how to. she spoke about that, and I heard it, and it was something that I appreciated. Both candidates were skilled and polished. They were both consummate professionals. Both expressed that data was something that informed their decision-making, that that professional development of their teaching staff was driven by looking at what are the needs of our students. And the only ways to look at that with any depth and specificity was to really invest in strong practices of reviewing in a constant cycle the data that you have in front of you. Neither one presented reluctance or a shyness about doing that work, and neither one expressed a reluctance or a shyness about making sure that we, as a governance board, Chris, that resonated with me as well, as a governance board, had access to that data so that we could share with our constituents and the parents what was happening within the schools. In particular, Thomas Anderson spoke about how our students are the best proof of the product that is the Newton Public Schools, that they're going forward into the world and continuing to do so, and going to their first choice, second choice schools, that was a big, I think he described it as the commercial for the Newton Public Schools. And I thought that was really, really reflective of the fact that we may wonder, as parents, we hear a lot from our constituents that they're not quite sure how the kids are learning, but they're learning and they're going on to do great things in the world, and the proof is in the students. So I thought that was really interesting comment. There was a focus on communicating effectively about the things that are happening in the schools and investing heavily in building the infrastructure of trust with the parents and residents. That was something that Mr. Anderson talked about, and really demonstrated that he would work to make sure that we had those trusting relationships with our parents, because they needed to understand what was happening in the schools. They needed to understand it, and if they understood it, they'd then be comfortable with the ways that their children are being taught, and it would smooth over some of those trickier conversations and make things much more amenable for us to just trust and understand what's happening in our schools. I think both had several specific examples that were demonstrating that as leaders, they've had to pivot at various times in their careers. And I think acknowledging the mistakes and acknowledging those opportunities to change course, change direction, and turning it into a strength is something that demonstrates the true mark of leadership. Anna Nolin talked about closing a school, and we all know how difficult and fraught, and I can only imagine what an emotional, hard process that was. But she talked about weathering that process with grace and building a stronger collaboration with her community on the back end of it. I think that was something that particularly I found striking. The last thing is the nearly unanimous consent from Anna Nolan's school committee chair and her union leadership. Both of them said almost the exact same thing in my conversation with them. They said, we don't want her to leave. We very much don't want her to leave. However, Newton would be so lucky to have her. And I thought from both of those positions, they're very different ends of the spectrum of the leadership of school districts. That was high praise indeed. And so, those are my thoughts. I appreciate it. I think all of you expressed similar thoughts, but if anyone wants to have something they feel they didn't say, just raise your hand and indicate you'd like to say something more. You have an additional thought, and we'll make sure everyone feels full. Go ahead, Anping.
Thank you. In my opening remarks, I did not talk much about details of why I made my decision. So let me highlight it a bit. Probably it's good for our school committee and for our community to see why we made this decision. Again, as I said, they both are truly educational championship and education leaders, no doubt about that. But here I want to highlight a little bit difference here. For Mr. Anderson, he is broad or collaborative, people-oriented school organizational leader. I want to use this organizational leader. He used brand. And in his 90 days, he used different brand and talking about the students are best commercial. This almost like a CEO talk about company. And I could understand when I look at his background, he traveled around the country. He went to the Randolph as a kind of a savior of the district, turned around district 3 years, very impressive. So he had to reach out to the community. So here is his quote. I believe collaboration is critical to ensure staff are receiving they need to engage and motivate students of all backgrounds and abilities. Very impressive, talking about staff and students. And I think he answered my question better than Dr. Nolin. No doubt about that, even though I pushed him on the second part of how to sustain, how to enhance the Newton legacy of education excellence, but he understood very well the students of all background and abilities. He traveled around the country. He had so many positions. So that's for Thomas Anderson. For Nolin, I think Dr. Nolin, she is focused, student-oriented, teaching and leading, teaching and learning leader. Now, that's important, and we were all impressed. That is her quote. I'm sorry, her quote. My primary focus has been on supporting instructional leadership within a school district. Now, that's very critical. That's why it got my attention. Very focused. And here's my, here's something she really got my attention. She mentioned again in NATIC, they have the benchmark for all students. They had the screening of the middle school students, social emotional status. The NATIC working with the hospital medical staff to do this individual screening. I was so impressed. And I think, she even mentioned that beside IEP, we give every student some kind of educational assessment, all-around assessment. I think that should be the model for our Newton. And I've been talking about that for quite a while. It's very critical. So this is very focused attention to the students and learning and teaching and learning. So again, that tip the balance right here. And I want to say just a few words about Thomas Anderson. He will have a large stage to play his role. I have no doubt he will be a larger district superintendent. I will not be surprised. Well, could it be Springfield and Worcester, and even could it be a commissioner of State Department of Massachusetts elementary secondary education? I could see. So you guys probably still would have him for a while. He will come back, I promise, and I dare to predict. So in that sense, it's not lost for him. I'm willing to say that. He will have a large role to play, and he will be sought after. Even though for Newton, I think Dr. Nolin seems a perfect match here. And again, I want to say, I repeat this, but let me repeat again. Dr. Nolin's the personal core value is high standards plus high support equal high respect. And I added two more words, high respect and high achievement. Of course, we need to discuss what's the meaning of high here. But it's easy to use that phrase, and I love that, which matches our Newton School the core value. And I'm very happy to support as our candidate.
Thanks, Ping. Anyone else care to additional thoughts? Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so, in the 6 years I've been involved with MPS, I think this process has by far been the most in-depth community engagement I think I've seen. The fact that it happens to be coinciding with when we do our PTO visits and, the outreach on the override and all these other things, it's been a level of engagement that, is far beyond anything. And we've heard a lot from the community. We've heard a lot from our families. We've heard a lot of diverse viewpoints. And, much as I talked about Mr. Anderson's, humility to and self-reflection to think about, decisions of the past, I just want to say, I think as an institution, we shouldn't let this moment be lost to have that same self-reflection and that same humility, and to think about those diverse viewpoints, even if it's something you don't personally agree with, that it's something that we need to respect in our community. And, I do hope this is a inflection point for us as a governing body and as an institution to think about what we've been told and hopefully move forward in a way that reflects those views. On a lighter note, I can't believe no one brought up that Dr. Nolin rides a Harley in a motorcycle club. And, if that's not a plus, I don't know what is.
Spoken like a fellow motorcycle rider.
I'm not.
All right, I was curious about that. Thanks, Chris. Any additional comments from anyone else? Okay, I see none. I hear none. I think at this point, we will now proceed to the selection of a superintendent. In preparation for our selection procedure, I've provided a motion template for us to use during this portion of our deliberation. You should have it before you now. In fact, I don't, so I'll find it in my stack of papers in a minute. Thanks, Kathy. Thank you. Let's see. It was provided by our legal counsel to ensure that our motion recognizes that the approval to hire the superintendent is conditioned upon the successful completion of negotiations and the background check. So at this time, I will entertain a motion if anyone would like to make it. Go ahead, Mayor Fuller.
I move to appoint Dr. Anna Nolin as superintendent of the Newton Public Schools commencing July 1st, 2023, subject to reaching an agreement with her on a contract of employment mutually agreeable to the candidate and the school committee and signed by both parties or their designees and subject to an acceptable background check.
Is there a second? Go ahead. Go ahead, Ping.
Should I say something or?
Just
Okay.
into the mic, you second.
Yeah, I'm going to second Mayor's motion.
Thank you very much. So we have a motion by Mayor Fuller and a second by Ping. Any further discussion? Hearing none, seeing none, we'll now proceed to a roll call vote. Ward 1.
Yes.
Ward 2.
Yes.
Ward 3.
Yes.
Ward 4. Yes. Ward 5.
Yes.
Ward 6.
Yes.
Ward 7.
Yes.
Ward 8.
Yes.
And Mayor Fuller.
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously. We have approved the appointment conditioned on the successful negotiation with the candidate and the acceptable background check of Dr. Anna Nolin. Congratulations to Dr. Nolin. Our consultants with HYA, Aresta, and Jeff will reach out and finalize that process with our candidate. I want to thank everyone who has, from our faculty and our staff, just looking around the room, you've all touched various points of this process, and you've all been deeply assisting this school committee to make the decision that we've just made, and we appreciate you. Kathy Lopes, I see you. You were on the search committee. Liam Hurley was very early on helping to put together the RFP for our search consultants and throughout. Stephen Retendi, very, very long suffering. Every single meeting that we've had in this in this way, he has been the tech support behind the scenes. We appreciate that. Jill Murray Grady with the legal advice throughout. And Toby, you and Aisha have been incredibly instrumental in making sure that we've thought about the staff and elevating them and keeping them centered through the process, and sharing very candid feedback with our staff and having a voice into the process. We appreciate that. You've also taken point on with Kathy Smith, our interim, thanks to her too, for coordinating and orchestrating the candidate visits. Deeply appreciate that. We appreciate the principals who contributed to that process as well. Lisa Mazzola, who's frantically typing and keeping notes over there in red. We appreciate you for, again, you've been every meeting through this process, you've been there helping and assisting us and keeping us organized with all of the materials that we need. And I think Mayor Fuller, I appreciate you giving a nod to Emily and myself, but I think the school committee as a whole deserves a show of appreciation, because you've all given up many of your hours, been very flexible in doing so, and it is deeply appreciated by this chair, and I'm sure by our community as well. So if I left anyone off that list, it is because we're all very tired. And I will make points over the next few weeks. Next week is school vacation week. I won't bother anyone, but I'll make sure to give a personal thank you to everyone who has helped in the process. I would encourage my colleagues to do the same. Anyways, at this time, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
And we have the executive.
Oh, well, but at 11 o'clock, unfortunately, because of the way the notice was given. So we'll do that 11.
You're kidding.
Yep. Yep. So we will.
Going into Jill.
The
Do we have to
executive
wait
session.
till 11 o'clock?
It's
for the
noticed for
executive
11.
session?
Yeah. Yeah. So we will be back at 11 to vote to go into executive session. Go ahead, Aresta. One more thing.
So sorry.
No worries.
Spoke briefly with Dr. Nolin, and she is excited and happy to hear the news and looks forward to the negotiation process.
Ah, wonderful.
Fabulous.
That was a real-time update. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. At this time, our public meeting is adjourned. We will reconvene at 11 o'clock to vote to enter into the executive session. Thank you, everyone.
By the way.
Record.